What's up guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Warren. I am a banker here in London and a property investor across the north of England. My goal is to live free and independently from property, so I'm looking for an income of £3,000 per month from property. If that's what you're on to, like and subscribe. That is what my channel is all about. So guys, I'm starting to wonder if it's time for me to stop buying terraced houses and stick with new build flats that are less drama. Why? Because I am facing damp once again in a property that I've bought. I'm genuinely wondering whether it's time to stop choosing terraced houses and go for new build flats because there's less drama and there's less stuff to fix in new build flats. But the flip side is that when you buy terraced houses on a freehold, you can add value and do a lot more with them. But here we go again, guys. Penetrating damp and mold seems to be my niche. Maybe that's what this channel will start focusing on going forward, okay? What are the chances that this will happen 2 times in a row? Now, I first found out, and this is my property in Hull, by the way, I first found out about the penetrating damp and mold from the tenant in April, a few months ago. They got in contact and they wanted to alert me to an issue in the house. And I'm like, okay, what's happening? They was like, there's mold. I'm like, send me pictures. And it was quite extensive, right? It wasn't pretty at all. And first question I asked was, okay, how long have you been encountering this for? They came back to me and said pretty much from after the first month we moved in.
Jesus Christ.
So we're talking December, okay? December of last year. So I'm like, you've been encountering this for 5 months and you're only just telling me about this now. I was vexed, guys, I'm not gonna lie, okay? And often mold is down to condensation as a result of poor ventilation in the house. So tenants not opening their windows or there not being enough extractor fans in the house, right? And as a result, condensation builds up on the walls. And mold is an organism that only tends to grow where there is damp, like permanent long-term damp, and there's no airflow, i.e. ventilation coming through. That is generally most of the time how mold occurs in a house, okay? But that's not only how or why it grows. So it's not always just as simple as improving the ventilation and the mold just goes away by itself over time. In my case, it was more serious, guys. In my case, it was penetrating damp. What is penetrating damp? It's basically, in really simple terms, where moisture from the outside, whether that's rain, usually rain, comes through the walls and ends up on the inside of the house. The damp penetrates the walls, ends up on the inside. The walls on the inside are damp on an ongoing basis, and then you have mold and issues like that. So when it came down to the nuts and bolts of my property in Hull, there were 2 main factors that were causing the mold in the house. First and foremost, it was the penetrating damp through the walls in a few different places. And then there was actually an issue with condensation down to poor ventilation. So the tenants weren't opening the windows enough. They were boiling a lot of food, right? And a lot of that moisture doesn't have anywhere to escape, so it's staying in the house and in the walls. So primarily it was down to penetrating damp, but there was also an issue of condensation due to poor ventilation. And we'll talk about how that was fixed beyond just opening the windows more often as we go further into this video. So how did I go about tackling the penetrating damp and the mold that came as a result of that? Glad you asked. Now, this is where I give you a real interesting, mazy case study and a lesson in how to choose the right tradesman. Because what I've learned, and I learned this before, but once again now, it is an absolute wild west minefield. Tradesmen, not all tradesmen are created equal. There's no regulations, there's no controls over what they do. You really got to know what you're doing, otherwise you could get seriously, and I mean seriously, you'll see as we go on in this video, ripped off and misled and just led up the garden path by some tradesmen. So first of all, what I did was I started with a mold specialist because I'm like, okay, they've told me about the mold. The mold is what they can see on the walls. That is the most visible issue, because at that time when they told me about the issue, I didn't know that the root cause, as it would turn out to be, was penetrating damp. I was just fixated on mold. So I got a mold specialist, right? And as you can imagine, they are focused on mold, okay? So the mold specialist goes in. Well, actually, they didn't go in. They quoted me £1,000, right? That was their flat fee to go in, assess what the issue was, treat the mold. They were going to use some fancy chemical that they were going to spray into the atmosphere, and it attacks and kills the mold and prevents it from going back, and they put down this mesh and it prevents it from coming back, bloody bloody. And I was like, pretty impressive. Okay, that sounds really good. But then I went onto TikTok and I found this guy who I mentioned earlier who specializes in mold and damp. And I had a thought and I was like, what if the mold isn't just down to poor ventilation, right? What if it's down to damp? And I thought back to my property in Manchester where I had the issue of penetrating damp that I had to fix last year. So what I did is that I went on My Builder and Check a Trade, and I looked for builders that were tradesmen, but who happened to be builders that were specialists in penetrating damp. Okay, and as I've said on other videos, I covered this in my refurb video, my refurb of my property in Manchester. Watch that if you haven't. You really need to get, if there's nothing else you learn from this video, whatever you're doing, whether it's penetrating damp, whether it's doing a refurb, whether it's getting your roof fixed, changing your locks, always get multiple quotes. I would recommend at least 4 quotes. 4 quotes is what you need. And you're going to see there's a big reason why it's important in this particular case, right? And this is why I'm making this video on this particular experience that I've had. So let me just expand on that. Why do you need multiple quotes? Well, to understand whether you're getting ripped off or not, okay, I'm just going to put it plainly, to understand if you're getting ripped off or not, and to compare if they're quoting for the same works or something completely different. Because what you might find, most likely will, is that certain tradesmen might quote you for works that you don't need. So if you have multiple quotes and you get them to break it down by labour and materials, you can put them all side by side and be like, okay, these 3 are by and large quoting for the same works, the same stuff that needs doing, right? And if there's one on the end who's quoting for some random stuff, you can be like, well, I'm not sure about this one because it doesn't align with what 3 independent other tradesmen have quoted. And also you compare the prices, right? So get them to quote for, as I said, the labour and the materials. If they're all quoting for the same work and the same materials, those prices should be near enough the same. So if one tradesman is quoting, I don't know, £1,000 extra for the labour for the same work as the other 3, again, ask some questions like, why are you charging me more than these other 3? And that's how you can protect yourself to quite a large degree in this whole game of getting quotes from these cowboy tradesmen. They're not all cowboys, by the way, but there are some who are, right? So always get multiple quotes and always ask your tradesman to break down the quote by labour and materials so you can compare and contrast, okay? If they don't do that, if they don't want to break down their quote by labour and materials, don't go with them, guys. It's just not worth it. There's no reason why they shouldn't do that for you, okay? So let's talk about the quotes, right? So out of the 4 quotes that I got, and I'm going to cover how I got those, how I chose a particular tradesman further on in this video, but out of those 4 quotes that I got, the highest quote was triple. Okay, no cap, not exaggerating, triple.
Oh, you motherfuckers.
Okay, the cost of the lowest quote. And then the middle 2, there was £500 and £1,000 between those 2 and the lowest quote, right? So you had 3 that were, you know, fairly close together, a maximum of £1,000 between them. And then the highest one was triple the cost of the lowest one. Absolute joke. And that's why you need a minimum of 4 quotes. Because really and truly, right, with that highest quote, I got that quote back first. And guy was on the phone talking me through the quote. He was an older guy. He must have been in like his 50s or 60s. And, you know, when you're talking to older people, especially an old tradesman, they come across really, really knowledgeable, right? Like, they know their stuff. So he's just talking me through. He's like, you got to do this, you got to do that. And he was breaking it down. The knowledge, he was all in his head. I was just like, okay, so you clearly know what you're talking about. He's mentioning all this stuff. If I'd have just taken that first quote, right, I would have paid thousands of pounds more than I had to. I would have gotten extra work done that I didn't need to, all off of not doing a bit of extra legwork and getting a few more people through the door to look at the issue, right? So that's why you really do need to go for multiple quotes. And you might ask, well, why was that one triple the cost of the others? So he actually quoted, and I talked about this earlier on, I mentioned this earlier on, he quoted for some works that I absolutely, in his opinion, had to do to get the issue sorted. And here's a joke, right? He said, even if you get all of this done, there's still no guarantees that the issue will be fixed. And I'm just like, right. So what value I actually add in here? Like, why would I pay for all of this? And you're telling me at the end that there's actually no guarantees that it's actually going to be fixed. Okay, so for example, he told me that I had to get the whole of my loft insulated to eradicate the issue of damp and more of damp and condensation building up and therefore mold in the house, right? And if you don't know if you had any experience with property, I think even if you don't know property, a lot of people, or most people, know that getting your loft insulated is a spenny, expensive piece of work to do, right? So yes, it would have helped, okay, would have helped, but was it necessary for my particular issue of penetrating damp and mold? No, it wasn't. And to validate that, I asked each of the other 3 builders, 3 tradesmen who quoted also, and I said, right, I've had one tradesman who's quoted and said that I need to get the loft insulated. What do you think about that? They all pretty much laughed down the phone. One guy actually got angry. He was just like, some of these tradesmen out here, they're unethical. He was like angry that this guy had quoted me and advised me to do that. So these are the dark arts that you're dealing with, when it comes to dealing with tradesmen. So I'm going to say it one more time, just so I hammer home the message. Get multiple quotes from multiple tradesmen, get them to break it down by labour and cost of materials. Okay, now how did I find these tradesmen? So 2 of them I found myself, as I said, on My Builder and checkertrade.com, and the other 2 were recommended to me by my lettings agent. So I actually tried to do it myself to begin with. I kind of got into a state of a little bit of, I wouldn't say panic, but I was concerned, mold in your tenant's house. It's not a nice thought. And I was just aware, when they showed me the photos, I was like, crap, I need to deal with this quickly. So I just jumped on that site, My Nature. I kind of get straight to the solution and act, right? What I should have done is taken the issue to my letting agent first and be like, can you recommend a tradesman to deal with this? Why? Because, and you're gonna see why. Tradesmen recommended by lettings agents tend to be more reliable, more ethical, more professional, okay? And also, you might find that, if you come with a certain issue, and you might have a certain tradesman in mind that you think needs to deal with a certain issue. And that might be you actually need this kind of tradesman, not the one you was thinking of first. So I would recommend always starting with tradesman recommendations from a letting agent. So the first guy that I found myself, I got him to go to the house. So overall, I got 4 different tradesmen to go to the house. First guy went to the house and he basically called me within like a few hours of me posting the job on My Builder. And he was like, yeah, I'm keen to do it. I really want to sort out your problem. He was like really intentional. So I was like, yeah, I'm liking this. You're intentional. He goes out to the house. He takes a bunch of pictures. He sends me a report in like PDF and he breaks it down by labour, by costs, by room, what needs doing. I was just like, oh, this is pretty impressive. So at that stage, when I'd got that, before I'd, had the other tradesman go and see the property, I was genuinely, I'll be honest, I was thinking, I want to go with this guy. He's like, responds quickly. His manner is, pretty decent over the phone. He's intentional. He seems professional. But then that all changed when my tenant sent me a text. And she basically said that my neighbour wants to talk to me. And I'm like, why? So she's like, she just didn't want you to call you. She just wants you to call her about the tradesman that came and just talk for a few things. So I was like, yeah, cool. Let me give the neighbour a call. I was like, hi, I'm Warren. I own the property next door. You wanted to talk for a few things. So cut a long story short, she was just like, I'm not sure about the tradesman that you had come round and look at your property and the work that needs to do. And I was just like, okay, yeah, tell me why. Let's talk through this. In my head, I'm like, what's it got to do with you? But the thing is, actually, it did have a lot to do with her, because to get access to the wall that had the penetrating damp on it, we actually had to go through her garden and through her house to actually get to the wall. So anyway, she says that, the guy came over and she basically told me straight, she was like, I didn't really feel comfortable with him. And I was just like, well, why not? So basically, he had to, he gave her a knock and he was asking her and also another neighbour just some, I think, what came across as weird questions. But obviously I wasn't there So I can't judge, but I can only take her advice. But he was asking stuff like, what's in your shed? Is there anything of value in your shed? And I think the reason why he was asking that is because the shed backed up onto our wall. So there was about, I don't know, a couple of inches gap between the wall and the shed. And there was moisture in between the shed and the wall. So I think in his head he was asking that because he was thinking, I might have to move the shed or take the shed down. And if there's anything of value in there, it could be an issue. I think, I'm being kind and assuming the best of him, and I think that's why I was asking. But if you're a neighbour and you don't really know, and this guy's just turned up and asked if he can come through your back garden and have a look at the wall, you don't know, and you don't even know he's coming, I can totally understand why that would be a bit unnerving. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. He was also apparently sitting on the wall, so he was kind of sitting on our wall that obviously backs onto the neighbour's wall, and she said he was just sitting there and just like surveying her garden and the neighbour's garden, so again would have come across a bit weird. And then the kicker is that he said to the neighbour, look, in order to do this, I'm going to need to put up scaffolding, and I'm doing the work, and I'm going to be starting in around about a few months. And he said the scaffolding will have to be up for 6 weeks. And there's a bit of work to do. I'm going to need access to your garden. And then apparently he wrote this all down on a note, by the way. And then at the end he put a smiley face and a kiss. And she told me all this on the phone. I was just like, okay, I've given him the benefit of the doubt up until now, but that is strange. I mean, as a professional, tell me what you think in the comments. That's a bit weird to do that, right? To say to anyone, regardless of whether it's the person you're doing the work for or their neighbours or other people that you got to deal with, to write them a note with a smiley face and a kiss. And, he basically assumed that he was doing the work. I hadn't said to him by then that he was doing the work. He was like, I'm coming back in a couple of months. I'm going to be up. And she also had children as well. So she was like, I don't really want a bunch of tradesmen in my garden with scaffolding up for 6 weeks whilst I've got children. And he comes across weird, so I don't want him around the kids. Blah, blah, blah. So I was just like, cool, do you know what? I won't go with him, okay? And it's at that stage when I rang the letting agent, got some recommendations from them. Another guy came in, and the work's done now, by the way. But he was like, no, I only need scaffolding up for 2 days max. He was more professional. He wasn't weird. And she was a lot more comfortable with him. So that's I think a first-hand case study, experiential story of why you probably want to get recommended tradesmen for big jobs like this. I think, you can go to My Builder or Shake a Shade for like minor stuff. So whether it's like, I don't know, fixing your white goods, your washing machines break down, or you need a plumber, fine. But for like maybe larger, more grander scale complex works like this, where they're going to have to interact with neighbours or your tenant as well, get a recommendation from a letting agent who uses trusted, reliable, normal, non-weird tradesmen. So as I alluded to bring this home, work was done, guys. So the guys that came, they did the work, they sorted it out for the tenant. They basically the work, let's go through the work actually that was actually done, that was required, right? So they needed to repoint bricks in the gable wall. The gable wall is a wall at the end of the property. In fact, I'll put a picture up on screen now to show you what a gable wall looks like, but there was some brickwork that needed repointing. Repointing is basically removing old, crumbled, weathered bricks and putting new bricks in there. I also needed a damp-proof course inside some of the walls in the inner part of the house. They needed to seal some parts of the chimney. There were some gaps around the chimney, around the flue. They needed to replace a gutter. So I had a wooden gutter. Imagine that, a wooden gutter on the outside of the house, and it was basically drenched and rotting, and as a result of that, water was seeping in because the gutter wasn't functioning really, and it wasn't draining water away from the house. So we replaced that with a plastic one, and then also they installed a number of ventilation fans throughout the house, so in the kitchen, bathroom, and also the loft. And the idea behind that is that the moisture that collects inside the house through cooking, showers, boiling your kettle, mopping the floor, drying your clothes, blah 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 blah, that all gets extracted out of the house and doesn't stay in the house and condense on the walls and cause mold once again. So a lot of work was done, but I am confident that there won't be any issues going forwards. Maintaining a house is like maintaining a car to an extent. You buy it, but you are going to have to spend at some point, it's inevitable, for the upkeep of the house, okay? Houses aren't just for Christmas, they're forever. So yeah, that is my story of mold and damp once again in a property. Now, I am gonna persevere with freehold terraced houses. I'm gonna get more extensive surveys done going forwards. I think that's the answer to identify these issues up front. And if there is any issues, either not go ahead or knock some money off of the purchase price to cover the costs of that, because it's no joke, okay? So guys, I hope this video was helpful. Let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks as always for supporting this channel and watching. Like, subscribe, send this channel to your friends, because that's how it grows, and I'll see you guys in the next one.